In this video, I'm going to explain the Paycheck Protection Program and the Emergency Injury Disaster Loan from the perspective of a real estate agent, realtor, or broker. If you haven't heard of these programs, basically they're a loan that when used for qualified purposes are going to be treated as free money and forgiven. Yes, you heard that right from a CPA telling you that you may receive quote unquote free money. I'm also going to answer the top 10 questions I received from my clients about these programs. Yes, you qualify, so stay tuned. All right, so before I get into the details, let me just introduce myself. My name is Navi Miraj. I'm a CPA that helps clients around the country save thousands of dollars in taxes. I have a niche in my business where mainly my clients are real estate professionals, so your realtor, agent, or even broker, all right? But the purpose of today's video is to talk about the Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP, and the Emergency Injury Disaster Loan, or you may hear me refer to it as EIDL program, and what it means to you as a real estate professional. Now, I'm gonna kind of treat this video in sort of like a Q&A format, and so you may see me read from time to time. I've got about 10 questions that I've kind of summed up from clients, and they're all kind of touching on the same basic theme. So I decided to reword those questions and answer them for you here in this video. So the first question is, what are the PPP and EIDL programs, and why should I care about them? Well, basically, these are programs that are available through the passing of the CARES Act. You know, by now you probably realize that there's this pandemic going on, right? And so, you know, we'll dive into the details here soon, but you should care about these programs because A, you qualify, and B, if you use the programs to your advantage and you treat them the way you're supposed to, the money you receive in the form of loan proceeds or even a grant, and I'll get into that here in a second, will be forgiven, meaning you don't have to pay it back. Basically, the government is trying to stimulate the economy and pay to have you on payroll or to keep your small business afloat for the next couple months. So it's not a scam. It really is free money. It's probably the only time I've been able to say this. And like I said, the government's trying to stimulate the economy. So let me unpack these programs, if you will, and kind of dissect each one. So the Paycheck Protection Program, it's primarily, you know, you can figure in the name, it's revolving around payroll, right? And they define payroll costs a few different ways. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, hey, Navi, I'm a real estate agent or a realtor, I don't have employees, or if I'm a broker, I typically don't have employees, I have independent contractors, you know, you don't qualify. You're wrong. You do qualify. You know, typically you either are taxed as an S corporation and you have payroll costs because you pay yourself a salary, or you're taxed as a sole proprietor, and the calculation for finding out how much you could apply for is based on your net earnings of your business. The amount that you'll qualify for is equivalent to about 2.5 times your payroll expenses if you're an S corporation, and if you're taxed as a sole proprietorship, then it's equivalent to 2.5 times your average monthly earnings or your net income. And you know, I'm not going to get into all those intricate details here, but on my website at navimirajcpa.com, I actually have not just these 10 questions, but over 25 questions with detailed answers that can kind of explain the details here. Now, if you use the loan proceeds for payroll, mortgage interest, rent expense, or utilities, you can have the entire amount forgiven. And I'll get into the details here in a second. All right, so that's PPP, Emergency Injury Disaster Loan, or EIDL, as you'll probably hear me call it from here on out. The EIDL program has the word loan in it, right? But there's actually up to a $10,000 advance feature that you can apply for, and these are the SBA words, not mine, but the first 10K, the advance that you receive, will actually be treated as a grant. So you don't have to pay it back if you use it for qualifying purposes. There are some new reports coming out that, you know, it depends on the number of employees you have. So it might be, you know, $1,000 per employee, but I still encourage you to apply. Those of you that are real estate investors, stay tuned because you may be able to apply as well. All right, so do real estate agents or realtors qualify? Who does not qualify? So yes, real estate agents and realtors qualify. And again, I mentioned at the beginning, you may not understand this because this might be a little bit of accounting language, but basically, if you're a real estate agent or realtor, you either formed an LLC or a PA or a corporation and you're taxed as an S Corp, so that's one bucket that you fall into, or you didn't do any of those things and you're treated as a sole proprietorship, and you too qualify, no matter which of those two buckets you fall into. So to qualify though, the main requirement is that you needed to have sales in your business prior to February 15th, 2020. This program is to help existing businesses and not new ones. So if you're a business that was not formed or you weren't closing deals prior to February 15th, 2020, then I'm sorry, that's the one situation where you may not qualify for this program. Now, also, this is for small businesses. So if you are an employee, right, and not an independent contractor or not an agent or don't have a small business, then you won't qualify for these programs, but there are programs in the CARES Act for you, the employee who has an employer. Where can I find information on all these programs? Well, this is going to sound biased, but I mentioned a little bit ago that on my website, I've created an entire web page strictly for, coronavirus and how these programs can be applied to you as a real estate agent or realtor. So I would encourage you to go read that information because I'm writing it in layman's terms from the perspective of an agent or realtor. You can also find information from its source, and I recommend doing that because there's a lot of misinformation out there already. And you can find information about the PPP program as well as EIDL on the SBA's website, which is sba.gov. All right, the next question I got was, what should I be doing or avoiding now in my business to help maximize the loan and the forgiveness amount? The forgiveness amount. So, let me kind of dissect that for a second. So, there's two parts to that question: maximizing the loan amount and making sure I get it all forgiven. To maximize the loan amount, you want to ensure that you're including all payroll expenses. And I don't want you to overthink this. The details are on my website, but basically, if you're an S corporation, you should be paying yourself a quote unquote reasonable salary. And typically you're doing that through hiring a payroll company or you have your accountant doing that. So you'll include your individual salary up to $100,000 as well as employer contributions, right? So if your business is paying for healthcare or retirement benefits to you as an employee, you can add those expenses as well. You're not just capped at the $100,000 of salary. If you're taxed as a sole proprietorship, right, you're not an S corporation, then this includes the net profit of your business as well as, again, health insurance and your retirement plan. To maximize the loan forgiveness, you will need to ensure that you're using the loan proceeds for the qualified purposes, right? And so for both the programs, the government wants you to use these for a few things. They want you to use it to maintain your payroll. So if you're an S corporation, don't lower your payroll limits here in Q1 or Q2 or Q3 of 2020. Keep those consistent with what they were prior to coronavirus to make sure you get all the amounts forgiven. You can use the funds for the PPP program for, I mentioned a moment ago, mortgage interest, not the principal, but the interest, rent expense, and utilities. Now, my average realtor clients don't have this, but my brokerage clients do have those items, right? And so you can pay that. But the important thing to note that, it's called Paycheck Protection Program, right? So the government wants you to use 75% or more of the loan proceeds for payroll cost, and you can use 25%. I would advise you to use a little caution there. Let's try to keep it at 20% or lower for those other expenses that I just mentioned to make sure all of it is forgiven. You also want to make sure that you're using the funds that you receive over the next 8 weeks once you've received those funds, right? If you don't have payroll expense for 8 weeks, and then you increase it, let's say in Q4 of 2020, well, that's not how the program is designed. It's designed for you to use over the next 8 weeks as you receive the funds. All right, the next question I have is, what time period should borrowers use to determine their payroll cost to calculate the maximum loan amount? Now, this one's important. In general, you can, different banks are saying different things, but basically, you can either use 2019 expenses, payroll costs, or the last 12 months prior to the coronavirus hitting the US, right? So maybe it's February 1st, 2019 through January 31st, 2020. But there is a little caveat. If you weren't in business from February 15th, 2019 to June 30th, 2019, then you may use the average monthly payroll cost for the periods of January 1st, 2020 through February 29th, 2020. So why that's important is, you don't want to lower your loan amount by, looking at your payroll costs if you weren't in business, right? So if you weren't in business prior to those dates, you want to maximize the loan amount you can apply for by using January 2020 and February 2020 amounts. All right, next question, question 6. What is forgiven for realtors and 1099 independent contractors? Well, all realtors are independent contractors, right? But what is forgiven? The specific guidance, believe it or not, hasn't actually been released yet. That's one thing that's unique with this CARES program. The government kind of rushed through it to make sure it's available to you and you can apply as quickly as possible. But the specific details on how you're going to get the loan amount forgiven have not really been explained just yet. One thing I would guide you on is to use the loan proceeds, whether you do the PPP or EIDL, and make sure that you are, maintaining salary levels that I mentioned. So you're using the loan proceeds for payroll expense, the mortgage interest, the rent, the utilities, as I mentioned earlier. Also, that ratio that I just talked about. You need to make sure that 75% or more are used for payroll, and then 25% or less is used for those non-payroll expenses. Okay, next question. What documentation should we prepare when submitting the application? Well, if you're an S corporation, it can get a little bit confusing, but you're going to submit your payroll document. So the bank might want to ask you for your W-3, 941s. If you're not familiar with these documents, this is documents that will be provided by your payroll company, or if your accountant or CPA does payroll manually for you, then ask them for the documents. They can provide it for you. But you want to submit all of that. Basically, the way the banks are doing this is they're going to take your word for the amount that you're applying for, hoping you did the calculation correctly, and then they're going to ask for these documents to sort of substantiate that, yeah, it's reasonable that you ask for these amounts because they can see the documents that you submitted along with your application. Now, for the EIDL program, you actually, I'll touch on this in a second, you actually apply for that program directly through the SBA, and you don't need a lot to apply for that 10K advance. You're going to need, your name, your social security number or your EIN, your revenues, and they'll even ask you for cost of goods sold, which most of my realtors, don't have cost of goods sold. That's mainly for businesses that have products that they're selling, not providing a service. Is the forgiven loan amount taxable? No, that's the great thing about this. It's explicitly written in the CARES Act that the amount that you receive that ends up being forgiven will not be taxable income to you, right? So it's really free money, guys. You need to be applying and researching this information. Next question. Should I apply for PPP or EIDL? Can I apply for both? Well, my recommendation is that you apply for PPP first, and if you don't qualify for some reason, then apply for the EIDL program. The reasons why you might not qualify for PPP are usually fall into two buckets. One is, you formed an S corporation, but for whatever reason, you weren't on payroll, you weren't taking a reasonable salary, and so you don't have, proof of payroll costs to submit for the loan application, right? If you're doing that, reach out to me. That's probably a big red flag for an audit, and you need to be paying yourself a reasonable salary. But that's besides the point here. That's why an S corporation may not qualify. If you're a sole proprietorship, you may not qualify if you didn't make any money, right? If your net profit is zero or even negative, then you're not gonna qualify because the calculation is based off your net profit. So in those two scenarios, then you may want to try applying for the EIDL program directly through the SBA. They're not asking you to submit payroll costs in the application, and if you get the advance, then after you get the money and the SBA reaches out to you, you can prove out to them, hey, these are my expenses, and see if they will make it forgiven. If they're saying, hey, it's not forgiven, then just give them the money back. What do you have to lose? Just apply. I mean, the language on the SBA website, a deck that I noticed, just said, hey, if you're not sure if you qualify, apply anyway. They want to see businesses come out of this coronavirus and survive, okay? They're going to be a little bit lenient with some of this stuff. It's not going to be 100% black or white. All right, question 10. Can I apply for EIDL if I have investment real estate? Now, this is interesting. For those of you that have real estate property that you have a tenant in, I would encourage you to apply for EIDL, not PPP, right? Because you typically don't have payroll if you're a landlord. But for the EIDL program, you might want to consider applying because, have you had conversations with your tenant, and are they going to continue to pay you rent for the next, 2-3 months? Maybe not. So maybe if you apply for the advance and you receive those funds and then your tenant stops paying you, you'll be able to prove to them that, you were impacted by this coronavirus disaster. Also, maybe if you don't have a tenant in there right now, right? And you could prove that you've rented out this place before, and you can make the argument that, I couldn't get a tenant in here because of I couldn't show the property, and so as a result of the disaster, I was injured, right? Those are just two things to think about. Here's a bonus question. I said it was going to be 10 questions. Here's question 11. Where do I apply? So for the PPP program, this is a little bit information that's all over the place out there, but basically you're going to apply for wherever your business checking account is. That bank should have a program set up for you to apply. And initially, a lot of the banks weren't ready, but now they all are pretty, typically they're ready at this point. Now, you might run into a situation where the bank, wherever you bank is not accepting applications. Well, in that opportunity, you might want to, in that event rather, you might want to call your more community banks who have set up small programs with the SBA, and they're helping more than just those customers that meet the regular guidelines. So they might ask you to apply even though you don't bank with them already. All right, for the EIDL program, you actually don't need a bank, you don't need a banker. You go directly to the SBA's website, sba.gov, and the link is also on my website, and you apply directly through the SBA's website. The application kind of scares you. It says it's going to take 2 hours or so to complete. Honestly, it should take you 20 minutes, if that. All right, so as I mentioned, on my website, I've got over 25 frequently asked questions. I'm helping small business owners and real estate professionals get through this mess, right? I'm not charging for it. It's information that I've researched over the past couple of weeks. I spent hours upon hours developing the frequently asked questions. Go there, read it. If you have a question, reach out to me. You can email me at navimurad.cpa.com is the website, or navi@navimuradcpa.com is my email address. If you found this video helpful, please either comment, share it with your fellow realtor, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.